Excited. Thank you, Adam and Harrison, for joining us today. Adam is the founder of Quora and also on the board of OpenAI, and Harrison, the founder of Langchain. Maybe we'll start just by introducing yourselves, and maybe Adam, start with you. How did you end up started working on Poe, which is certainly one of the more interesting kind of consumer experiences for interacting with a bot experience?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for hosting and thanks for having me here. So I've been interested in AI for a long time, and I've just always been very optimistic about the potential. For a long time, the AI was useful for things like recommender systems, which were very important for Quora. But we knew that someday we'd get to the point where AI was able to generate text. We just didn't really know when it was going to be. And so at Quora, we've been watching this very, very carefully. And early last year, we came to a realization that, hey, this is the time when we need to start to move, and there's a real opportunity here if we can take advantage of it. And so we started off and we did some experiments using AI to generate answers on Quora. And the initial conclusion we had from that was that AI it had gotten pretty good, but it was still not usually as good as the best human that our machine learning system could find to write an answer. But the cases where it really was an advantage was if someone needed an immediate answer to a new question, or if someone wanted to go back and forth and get follow-up questions answered. And so after experimenting with that for a while, we realized that actually a chat UI paradigm is the right thing for this new technology, rather than trying to kind of shoehorn it into the existing product that we had. And we also wanted to just be able to iterate at a faster pace. So this technology wave is moving so fast that we really need to just be able to adapt and move very, very quickly. And so one other advantage of building a separate product, aside from the UI considerations, is that we'd be able to move faster. And so around August last year, we ended up starting a new project, which ultimately was called Poe and launched in December. And so it's a fast chat interface to a variety of AI models. Currently, we have access to ChatGPT, the Anthropic models, a few different versions of Claude, and we have recently added GPT-4. So that's what we're doing now. It's a big focus for the company, although Quora is also continuing to go well and adapting to some of these new technologies at the same time.
Awesome. And Harrison, I think around August of last year is when you started dabbling with the idea of Langchain. Maybe share some background on what instigated working on it and deciding to make it a company.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you guys for having us here. I started, around August, I started going to a bunch of, I think that's when, generative AI has kind of just gone like woo over the past year even, but I started paying attention in August, went to a bunch of meetups in SF and chatted with a bunch of folks. And I noticed that they were doing a lot of the same things over and over again, and they were kind of like patterns in terms of the applications that they were building. And I think at that point, Jasper had been out, Copy AI had been out, these kind of like text generation applications had been out. But the new wave of applications, let's say, which were a bit more complicated and involved more kind of like orchestration of the language model with other sources of data and computation, were starting to be built. And there were some common kind of like abstractions and patterns that I was noticing. So, as a side project, there's also some really cool research papers that were coming out. And so I saw some common patterns, put them in a Python package, threw it out there, and then, have kind of like iterated on it since. We've been a company for about, I think, 2 months at this point, 2.5 months, with the idea of, again, continuing to just, abstracting out all these things was done with the goal of making it easier for everyone to develop these types of applications. And so that's the focus of the company as well.
Awesome. Adam, one thing that you do in Poe is expose all the different language models that people could use, as opposed to sort of pick the best one maybe for the user and say, hey, for your experience, here, use this. This is the best one right now. We're going to constantly switch out state of the art. But you actually expose that to the user with the idea of several different bots. What's the thinking there behind that?
Yeah, so I remember hearing an anecdote a long time ago that in the early days of the web, Yahoo was the dominant website, really, and there was a pretty big population of internet users who thought of Yahoo as the same thing as the web, and they would open their web browser and the default homepage was Yahoo, and they really didn't understand a distinction between Yahoo and other sites. But eventually, fast forward, the web is much more developed today, and people have more of an understanding of the different sites they want to go to. They might use Google to navigate that, but it's useful for people to have an understanding of where they're going, what they can trust, and have these different brands for different services that they access. And so with Poe, we want to be similar to a web browser in that we want to enable people to access many different forms of AI. And we think that some understanding on the part of the user about where their request is going and who they're talking to is going to be a useful thing. We do want to get into recommending people the best bot to talk to for their use case, but right now we're focused on just enabling access to as many different AI models as possible, including these foundational models like ChatGPT or Claude. But also, we want to provide access to any kind of application that someone might build on top of these through something like Langchain. We expect there to just be this very wide diversity of AI chat experiences that developers are able to build. So we're in the process of building an API, and soon we'll allow access to all developers to create these bots. And we're really looking forward to what everyone can create.
So you imagine in the not too distant future, developers, individuals will be able to create bot experiences alongside some of the initial ones you've offered up with the large language models.
Yeah, that's right.
What might be some of the examples that you'd hope happen and emerge in the next few months or quarters, depending on launch?
I mean, I think there's going to be this massive ecosystem that's similar to what the web is like today, but some of the early examples that we've played with that I think are promising. One is language tutors. So if you're trying to learn a new language, if you prompt ChatGPT the right way, you can get some help. But if you imagine a good language tutor, it might have a memory of what you're weak at and what you're strong at, and might try to intentionally prompt you to answer questions about areas that you're weaker in. It might have some kind of progress tracking. It might remind you how much, whether you didn't show up the day before to do your practice. There's a whole kind of experience you could build around that. And then this is just language learning. I think learning any kind of topic, you could build a similar kind of product. I think there's going to be a lot of bots that are essentially games or hosts of games that there's a ton of really exciting stuff that can be built there. I think a lot of companies have unique data sets that they want to move into a chat experience. And so I could imagine a world where most companies have their own bot that they provide to the public, hopefully through Poe, but also through other interfaces. I think this is going to become a common pattern that basically every company out there wants to provide.
Harrison, you were, I think, one of the first places many who've tried to build these bot experiences and connect them up to their own information that's not in the model, obviously, or other tools to take action, to retrieve additional information, and have made that easier for folks. Where are you investing time now in that? Where are you seeing developer interest in that? What's sort of the focus at the moment of connecting these models to more power?
Yeah, I'd say there's like two main areas, and I think both tie pretty nicely in with what Adam was talking about. I think the two are basically personalization and then kind of like agentic action-taking stuff. And so personalization can mean a variety of things. It can mean exposing all your company's data in a personalized chatbot that can talk about your company. It can also mean remembering things about the user and kind of like adjusting that way. And then the agentic part comes into taking actions, and so being able to interact with other resources, and sometimes you have data that's in text form and you can interact with directly. Other times you have data behind APIs and you want a natural language layer on top of that API, and so adding the ability for the language model to first generate a query, then take an action to query that, get it back, and then respond in a synthesized human way. I think those are kind of like the two main areas that we've seen a lot of developer interest in, and from the beginning, those have been kind of like, LangChain's not focused on, we have stuff around prompts, obviously, those are kind of like the new paradigm for coding these applications, but a lot of the tools added have been aimed at like personalization and then agentic things.
Obviously, tools, you called them tools, ChatGPT just came out, or OpenAI just came out and called them plugins. But the idea of connecting up the LLMs to other services, how do you think about that announcement? How do you think about tools in LangChain and more broadly this sort of idea of LLMs connected to external resources and where you think about that heading?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think there's been a huge swell of kind of like excitement around this, and I think it's been really interesting. It's connected well to a lot of the concepts that have been out in academia from the React paper in November or something like that. The Self-Ask paper also out in October, and so I think it's great to draw attention to this new or to this idea of connecting it to external things. I think it's also great to see how OpenAI is approaching it. They're one of the best like research organizations in the world, and they're dedicating a lot of resources to trying to get this to work well. And I think they launched something really impressive, and I think there's still a lot of stuff to be done in that space. And I think it's also really interesting to see how people want this not just with ChatGPT or GPT-4 or whatever fine-tuned model they're using, but with other models as well. So to hook it up to like Anthropic and have that model do it. People are already asking about like Llama and Alpaca, and can you use those to control your own and have more, have your own models run and do these types of things. So I think it's been really interesting and to see the increase, definitely like an increase in excitement and awareness around these really powerful ideas and abstractions. So.
You both sit over in a kind of large language model agnostic in many ways. As you're saying, connecting up tools to other foundation models people might want to use. Maybe it's in a private use case, and so they don't want to, private information, so they don't want to give it as much to OpenAI. Adam, you're exposing it to users to be able to pick and be aware of the different foundation models. How have you seen that? What's your emerging views on sort of the foundation model fight in some way, and are you sort of surprised and impressed with the quality that's coming out of Anthropic and some challenges as well as open source like Alpaca?
Yeah, I think, the field is moving incredibly quickly. I think it's pretty clear right now GPT-4 is in the lead, but the entire field is moving so fast that it's very hard to know where things will be in the future. I think we've gotten to the point where these foundation models are so powerful that it's sort of good enough for many applications, and it's at the point of you'll have diminishing returns to continued progress for some applications. For other applications, you're going to want just to always be on the frontier and have the most powerful thing. And so to me, a lot of the most interesting progress to be made from here is more around things like plugins or just better ways of fine-tuning the models, as opposed to just continuing to scale the models. And also with scale comes greater expense, and so things get not economical for many users. But it's an incredible field. It's moving so fast. I think we're all going to be shocked at where things are a year from now. I say that just extrapolating from past trends. And I think there's going to be a diversity of different providers of these models. Exactly how it'll all shake out as an industry, I think is very hard for anyone to say. You know, there's a camp that's saying it's going to be commoditized. There's another camp that's saying, you know, it should be like a winner-take-all market. I think it's very hard to say at this point how it's going to play out.
Yeah, I agree with that. And adding on, I think, you know, GPT-4 is clearly the best one out there at the moment, and there's some delta between them and Anthropic, and then, you know, Anthropic and the next like open source model or something like that. But I think it kind of comes down to like what's in that delta, and there's a lot of things that you can do that you can do with open source, and there's even more. There's a really, like, the Anthropic model is really good, and so there's a lot that you can do with the Anthropic model. And so for the plugins, for example, like, you know, can you use plugins as easily with the Anthropic model as you can GPT-4? Probably not, but I think there's some, like, with a little bit of like clever prompt engineering, you can get it to work. And I think that's also another like interesting thing that I've seen is that the prompts don't really transfer between models. And as I said, there's like this really fast pace of development. And so prompts that worked really well, like for example, the React prompts that came out in the paper in November or October or something like that, you know, those aren't necessary, or they don't work as well for the current state of the art models. And so it's tough to predict like what, you know, in a year, will all the models be roughly converged and prompts will work the same? Maybe will they have different styles that work for different models? I think that's another like interesting thing that developers are having to grapple with. So, you know, it's kind of simple in that you can just like change the model name, but it's not really that when you're doing these more complex things. So.
Obviously, it's a very different programming paradigm in that it's not deterministic. It's sort of fairly stochastic, and as you're saying, as you switch out the model, it changes. But even in general, as you allow people to use tools, is the agent going to use the right one at the right time in the perfect way? It's sort of goal-oriented, and I sometimes will joke that it's almost like a college freshman that occasionally gets drunk on Franzia. You know, it sort of like goes a little awry at times. Like, how do you think about helping developers in that paradigm? Where it's somewhat random. Like, how are you thinking about supporting developers building application experiences that they want to have a high amount of reliability, like meet user expectations, but could, there's a hallucination side, but also could just like not perform the desired goals?
Yeah, I think that's the main thing that we're thinking about. I think right now Langchain in its current form is really good for prototyping applications. It makes it really easy to get started, build them. I think the next thing is bringing it into production. And production not only comes with kind of like system challenges, but also with like reliability issues. And I think, you know, it's easy to get something that you can cherry pick an example for and tweet out on Twitter and get lots of likes, but getting that to work well in production is a whole other thing. And so one of the main things that we're thinking about is evaluation of these things, which, you know, you can't, maybe for some applications you can use like accuracy and other things like that, but for a lot of these, you know, it's longer textual answers. There's a few different axes that you want to evaluate them on. Is it like polite? Is it factually correct? And all of those are, you know, not nearly as simple as traditional machine learning methods or metrics. So I'm very bullish on the idea of actually using language models to evaluate themselves. I think Anthropic's done a lot of great work in that area, and so that's something we're looking into a lot. But yeah, I think evaluation has emerged as a big pain point, and I'm actually curious to ask Adam how you guys think about evaluation, because, you know, you guys have an actual product, and so it's much more top of mind for you, probably.
Yeah, so I think as much as possible, we want to let developers build the AI experiences, and then we want to provide developers with support that'll help them do their own evaluation, as opposed to us getting into that game ourselves. We want to get into a position where we're good at evaluating the differences between the different bots after they're created, so we can recommend the right one to a user for any given need they have. But for now, you know, we've found, you know, we do these systematic evals. We do it by hand. We found we have to do a very different process for this than what we had been used to for Quora in evaluating the quality of human written answers, because the answers are often, they seem right to someone who's evaluating them, but the answer could actually be wrong. And so we've had to set up some different processes. This is not something we've done a great job of yet, but we want to be in a position where we can really help developers evaluate their own models. So we're going to be working with them to make sure they have the data and the support they need to like run an A/B test, for example, when that's appropriate.
I think that's a really interesting point as well. The idea of like running A/B testing and stuff, like that's obviously pretty common in kind of like software and product development. But in machine learning, like you generally rely more on like MSE or accuracy or something like that. But now with these end-to-end applications that are really difficult to evaluate, I think those types of A/B testing and more traditional testing of things is really interesting.
So expect more in Langchain in this area?
Yes.
I'll ask one more and then maybe open up to the audience if there are any questions. An area that's obviously getting a lot of discussion is as these scale up, as the compute scales up, but folks try to scale up the data into them and find additional sources. I'm curious, Adam, how you think about twofold maybe. One is sort of unique data sets like the Quora data set as it applies to building some of these models. And then two, maybe there's a not a today problem, but a next few years problem maybe, where these UGC sites have been enormously impactful for training data, but maybe as users move away from sort of going and seeing who wrote the answer and moving to a world where a model outputs an answer, the sort of social status that would have come from being a thought leader on Stack Overflow or in Quora might diminish. And so there might be less incremental content generated that won't sort of keep us up. And I'm curious if you have a lens on that as it pertains to training these models.
Yeah, so first of all, we haven't gotten into training models on the Quora data set yet. That's something we want to try at some point, but it's not something we've done yet. And we actually committed to our users that if and when we do that, we will allow any Quora user to opt out of having their content used for training of large language models. And I think that's an important commitment because people have a choice about where they're going to share their knowledge and whether to share their knowledge. And if they don't have the certainty that it might not effectively be taken and reused by AI in ways that they didn't want, then they might be less likely to share on Quora. And we think that commitment is also going to give us the right motivation to make sure that any kind of training we do respects authors in the right way. So it might be that we have a bot in the future that can like quote from Quora answers or cite sources. And I think we should be able to find a good relationship where most authors on Quora are happy with the credit that they're getting, similarly to how they're generally happy with the distribution that they get on Quora itself today. In our case, we haven't really seen any reduction in the amount of people coming to Quora as a result of all these, this advancement of chat UI and AI. It may happen in the future, but we'll see. I think there's always going to be a pretty big segment of people who want to go to the source and they want to hear a story from a person who actually experienced that thing, and so we're going to just kind of see how things play out and react. But so far, the motivation for people to write answers on Quora has been less about the fact that someone in the future might look up their answer and read it, and more about short-term critique and comments and reception from the community on Quora itself, which is something that I don't see getting disrupted in the same way that people looking up answers a year later might get disrupted.
Hey, it's Eric. I'm going to jump in. I mean, you guys touched on this a little bit, but I feel like, we're talking about like GPT-10. GPT-10. I think there's this fear that like OpenAI could just be dominant. They're ahead. They keep learning more. Like Poe is predicated on people shopping between different ones and, somebody winning in a different use case than ChatGPT. And similarly, like the plugin case, I think there are people who say, Langchain's in trouble now. Like, can you address sort of the fear of like, if the world is dominated by OpenAI, are your offerings still relevant? And like, how do you think about that?
So as a board member of OpenAI, it's a hard question for me to answer. But I guess I will say, I've been on the board, and so I have a perspective on OpenAI's strategy and where things are going. And if it was just that they were going to totally dominate everything, then I wouldn't be building Poe. So that's the first thing I'll say. I think the other thing I think you can see in OpenAI's actions is that they, especially over the last month, there's been a big focus on developers. So there's all these different developer APIs that are available, and a lot of progress on improving things like the terms of service for developers. And that's happening because OpenAI, I think, recognizes that there's going to be a wide diversity of use cases that people want to do with this technology. And it may be that we end up in a world where OpenAI is providing this very powerful model, and then you have hundreds of companies building different things on top of it, and then all of those products are available through Poe, or many of them, the ones that where the UI is appropriate. And so a diversity of AI applications is not necessarily even in conflict with a world where OpenAI has the best model and effectively everyone is using that.
And I think like similarly, yeah, like, you know, a diversity of applications does mean that there will probably need to be tooling and other things built to help enable those. I think, you know, it largely depends on what OpenAI decides to do, right? Like if they decide to go really hard into this area, yeah, that's, you know, that might not be great. If they decide to go really hard into consumer products, right? I think like, I'm not on the board of OpenAI. Can I be on the board of OpenAI? So I don't know what they're gonna do. I strongly believe that one, people will always want some optionality. I think there's definitely like especially, yeah, I think there's a big value in kind of like being open and having interoperable systems. And then two, I'm also a belief that there's going to be a really, really long tail of applications. Yeah, I think OpenAI will probably remain a bit more focused on trying to provide the best possible model. And you know, they have done a lot to make the developer experience better, and I'm very grateful for that. But I do think there'll be tooling needed around that.
Maybe time for one last one.
I'm the guy behind Eric. There's this open letter out there from Milan and Woz et al. And you know, because you're on the board, it's probably hard for you to talk about that too. But and I actually like to hear what Miles thinks, but I'd just like to hear a reaction about why you think they had to publish that open letter and say, hey, let's stop everything for 6 months and take a big breath and think about this.
Great question.
Yeah, you know, obviously, I'm aware of the letter, and I don't think I can say too much more. I think there's a variety of different motivations that people have for suggesting it. I think that, I guess I will say, I think AI safety and some of the long-term issues that are going to emerge are incredibly important. And you know, in my role as a board member, it's very important to me that is something that I'm looking out for and that the whole board is looking out for. I think that whether a 6-month pause is the right answer and whether it's practical, you know, that's a different question. But yeah, I don't really want to get into any more than that here.
I haven't spent too much time on the fear mongering of like AGI taking over the world and like what we'll all do in that sort of future. I think there's spent a lot more time with developers who are still trying to figure out what can be possible here. There's fissile material, and we're still finding amazing new applications and capabilities. You know, it was only 6 months ago or so that the React paper came out with sort of chain of thought prompting, the ability to use tools. Like we barely started working on that. You know, Poe only 6 months old, and so I think with the clay that's already there to be used, there's a lot for amazing experiences to get created that seep into all pockets of the economy, and that's where I spend my time focused on. So. No thoughts there.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great panel. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.